Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us again today for another Synapticure webinar. I have the pleasure today of introducing a colleague and a friend of mine, Dr. Catherine Lefevre. Before we get started, for those of you who are joining us at Synapticure for the first time, as a quick reminder, we are a specialized telemedicine clinic for people with Parkinson's disease, ALS, PLS, and other neurodegenerative disorders. And we're a team of specialized neurologists, care coordinators, genetic counselors, and insurance navigators that really try to help simplify a patient and a care partner journey. And this includes medication management, identifying local resources, referrals to clinical trials, as well as just regular medical management. And this is all in partnership with your local care team. So your primary care doc, your neurologist, whoever's helping take care of you. And this is all covered by insurance, and it's from the comfort of your own home. So today, as I mentioned, I have Dr. Catherine Lefevre, who's going to talk to us about lifestyle medicine for brain health, the prescription that we all need. Dr. Lefevre is a neurologist in Saratoga Springs, New York. After her residency at the Mayo Clinic, she completed a movement disorders fellowship at Beth Israel Deaconess in Boston, and then did a research fellowship at the NIH. She started her career in academic medicine and served as director for the movement division and was a professor at the University of Louisville in Kentucky for 6 years before joining Northwestern University in Chicago. She's been a member of the Parkinson's Study Group and served as a site principal investigator on a number of Parkinson's-related clinical trials. During the pandemic, she encountered several personal challenges that led her on a path of getting board certified in lifestyle medicine. And in 2021, she joined a community-based medical practice in New York and emphasizes the importance of nutrition, exercise, social connectedness, stress reduction, and sleep to optimize health for herself and for her patients. She's also the co-founder of the Women's Neurologist Group, which is a network of nearly 4,000 women neurologists, and has served on the American Academy of Neurology's Task Force for Gender Disparities. So Catherine, Dr. Lefevre, it's great to have you today, and we're excited to hear you talk.
Thank you so much for the very kind introduction and invitation. I'm excited to speak to this group. And I think, as you mentioned, this Synapticure network is really a very innovative new way of providing care. And I'm excited about it. And I've shared it with some of my patients as well. So thank you. Yeah, so I will be happy to talk today about lifestyle medicine and share a little bit my own pathway, what got me interested in this, and hopefully some helpful tips that anyone can start applying today. So just to give a bit of an outline of my talk, so we'll talk a bit about why we see more people with Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and other brain disorders, and what lifestyle medicine can do to optimize health and brain function. And as I mentioned, hopefully everyone can take away some practical advice to make some of these changes. So first of all, I'm going to start with my own story. So as you mentioned, I was many years in academic medicine. Here's a couple pictures of me giving a talk at a conference in Chicago with some of my colleagues here. On the right side, the background here is Hong Kong during the International Movement Disorder Congress a couple years ago. I don't even remember which year it was. 2017 maybe. So I was really busy seeing patients, doing research, teaching medical students and residents, doing patient events, and I enjoyed it all, but it was a lot. and you know that as well. You also kind of were in academic medicine for many years, and it can be a lot. And so one of my challenges, with the pandemic, all of us, were kind of pulled in even more directions. And with the pandemic came a lot of anxiety, for our patients, for ourselves, what does it all mean? And my son was diagnosed with a rare brain disorder, and here he is in the middle of getting an EEG done. So I was kind of not just a neurologist for my patients, but was also kind of in the role of a neurologist for my son with a neurologic disorder all of a sudden, and then also was diagnosed myself with an autoimmune disorder. So lots of challenges, but that kind of really gave me a pause and made me kind of reconsider, well, what am I all doing? And my own health is suffering. I'm not there as much for my children who kind of need me. And so I made all these changes, and I kind of, tried to go down a path that improved my own health and, really allowed me to be more present for my own family and for my son, who is kind of depicted here with a rare disease kind of motto earlier this year. And one of the changes I really made, to optimize my own health was truly overhauling my own habits as far as diet and exercise goes. And it got me down this path of really looking more into, well, what should we all do, and really kind of take this more front and center stage. So before we kind of come to the more specifics of how does this apply to Parkinson's and to other brain disorders, I do want to speak a little bit about, what is lifestyle medicine, and not many people may be familiar with this term. So lifestyle is kind of a little bit vague. Wellness is kind of a similarly vague term, right? So are we talking about fruit cleanses or taking lots of supplements? What does it really mean? So the concept is certainly not a new one, and the foundation for lifestyle medicine goes back many 100,000 years far back. So this is a quote attributed to Hippocrates. Now, not true if he really said it, but the idea is, if we could give every individual the right amount of nourishment and exercise, not too little and not too much, we would have found the safest way to health. And I would say that this still holds true. Of course, we can't predict everything and can't prevent everything. But, again, the foundation for optimal health really lies within our daily habits. And so the more modern definition of lifestyle medicine as a specialty, and let me see. Video disconnected. All right. So is the use of evidence-based lifestyle therapeutic approaches with using a predominantly whole food plant-based diet, regular physical activity, adequate sleep and stress management, avoidance of toxic substances, and other non-drug modalities to treat, oftentimes reverse and prevent lifestyle-related chronic disease that's all too prevalent. So if anyone is interested, I linked the website here for more information. And so lifestyle medicine has been an officially board-certified specialty in the US for over 10 years now, and came mostly from the internal medicine practitioners who were interested to look at things like obesity, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and really try to stop the rise in these conditions with lifestyle methods. But as it has been evolving, it's really become clear that this applies very much as well to brain disorders. And so again, so the pillars of lifestyle medicine are physical activity, healthful eating, and we'll talk more about what that means in detail, managing stress, avoiding risky substances, improving sleep, and then interestingly, forming and maintaining relationships. And that's not often something that we address specifically in a doctor's office, but has really been shown, the better our social networks are, the better our support networks are, the better people do in their health and daily life. So it's not just important for our emotional health, but really also for our physical health. So, as I was mentioning, we have seen a rise in Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease, and to a large part, it is related to just a general increase in population over 65. So this is kind of an example of the world population 65 and older between 1990 and 2040 predicted, and there's obviously a huge increase here. And to a similar extent, we're also expecting the worldwide Parkinson population to go from 2.6 million in 1990 to over 17 million in 2040. And again, the mainstay is kind of an aging increase. So coming back to our lifestyle medicine story, and then how can this impact possibly the prevalence, but also how can applying these principles really change people's quality of life. This is one of my former patients, and he's been kind enough to share some of his pictures and story with me and allowed me to use this for presentations. So this, as I said, he was my patient actually back when I was in Louisville, Kentucky. He was diagnosed with Parkinson's in 2010, initially presenting with right hand tremor. He had a good response to medications initially, although over the years it became noticed more off time, so the medication wasn't lasting as long. And then he was changed from the carbidopa-levodopa, which as many people will recognize as the main treatment for Parkinson's disease, to a longer acting formulation, also called Vitari. And then his Parkinson movement symptoms were fairly well controlled, but visit after visit, he mentioned that he was really fatigued, his mood was low, and he had sleep problems. Now, we had talked about possibly changes he might try in attending better to his sleep, exercising, but he was in a very high stress job. He was, in fact, partner in a law firm. And as many lawyers do, you kind of do like 60, 80 hours, depending on the week. So he was just basically saying, there is no time in my life for exercise. Now, he did decide to retire in 2019, and around that time was also diagnosed with gastroparesis, which is kind of slowing of the digestion, which can happen in people with Parkinson and often leads to nausea and just kind of a feeling of fullness after just eating relatively small amounts of food. So due to that diagnosis, he did see a GI specialist and diet changes were recommended to him. And then he was motivated at the time to actually put some of this advice into practice. And so this is him last summer when he shared again an updated picture with me. And you can just kind of see it in his change in expression. So he's all smiling, he's all confident, and has basically told me that despite now being 3-4 years further along with Parkinson's, his quality of life is actually better, right? And that's pretty remarkable. So as we all know, Parkinson's, along with other brain disorders, are expected to progress every year, right? So you're kind of expecting that possibly people will do a little bit worse every year, but it's not always a one-way street, and there are indeed ways to make changes to improve quality of life, and it's not always medication. So the way he changed his diet was partly related to this diagnosis with gastroparesis. So he ate smaller portions, more frequent smaller meals, avoided high fat and high sugar foods. And then he really made a remarkable transformation from someone who was never exercising to starting with gentle physical therapy, balance training, and increasing this to walking every day for up to 2 hours. So he was hiking all around the Kentucky forests and hills, and is still doing that. So among the benefits was a weight loss of over 70 pounds, but the most sustained or benefits for him was really the increase in energy, feeling less tired, and having improvements in mood. All right, so we're going to break things down a little bit, and just want to talk about diet in a little bit more detail. So this is a quote from Michael Pollan, who's a famous food writer and columnist. And we're often confused, right? What is the best diet? There's so much conflicting news around, and we get bombarded from all the different articles and journals and friends and acquaintances, doctors, right? Is it the keto diet? Should we avoid gluten? There's so much different advice. And generally, I mean, a good principle that kind of boils down to is, eat real food, eat food, not too much, and mostly plants. And why, but mostly plants, right? And so there's many research, and again, mostly initially done for cardiovascular health, heart health, but this is kind of a pattern that comes out for lots of different health conditions, including cancer and including dementia, is that if diets are predominantly plant-based, it reduces the risk for heart disease by about 40%, reduces the risk for stroke by close to 30%, and reduces the risk for developing type 2 diabetes by 50%. So we kind of know that those types of diets are really good for our general health and then also for brain health. Now, are you familiar with the concept of blue zones? So this blue zones concept has become popular, 5 years ago or so. There's a book by Dan Buettner, and this comes out of research in looking into areas in the world where most people in their 90s and above live and are relatively healthy. So kind of this concept of healthy aging. And so these are some of the spots that researchers did identify, and that includes here kind of some little Mediterranean islands in Italy and Greece, an island on the coast of Japan, a specific place in Costa Rica, and interestingly also Loma Linda in California. And then researchers went to all these places and really studied, well, what was different and what was kind of the habits, the circumstances in these areas that were shared. And so there's a lot of availability about this concept now, but essentially what came out of the research that people in those areas were in a way living more naturally. So those are all, Sardinia, Italy, they're all kind of pretty tighter knit communities. So people were moving quite a bit, were eating a fairly natural diet, so lots of food that was local and not highly processed. But then the interesting thing was also that there was a more social connectedness in these areas compared to other areas in the same countries. So I do highly recommend that kind of reading. It's really interesting. So you can kind of easily find, there's several books now on these so-called blue zones, and including diet suggestions and so on. But that's interesting research to look into. Now, how does this compare to our standard American diet? And if you haven't picked it up on my accent, I'm from Germany originally. And I have to say, so I came to the US after medical school, and there's probably many reasons why people gain weight in internship and residency, but certainly that change in diet pattern was certainly a big one, along with the stress for me. So when we go in a typical supermarket, there's many kind of processed food, there's many added sugar, many added preservatives, and most of the food that is offered. And as we know, this does increase our risk for obesity, for diabetes, heart disease, and poor nutrition is actually cited as the leading cause of death globally. So if you contrast that with a whole food plant-based eating pattern, we're kind of looking at filling half of a plate with fruits and vegetables, drinking mostly water instead of processed drinks and soda, getting most of a protein from plant-based sources, so that include beans, legumes, but also nuts and seeds, and eating whole grains. So that's interestingly quite different. And on this plate, there's also not actually a special place for dairy. And we'll kind of come back to that. So especially as it goes to Parkinson's disease, milk consumption has actually been linked to a greater risk for Parkinson's disease. And that's mostly from large population-based studies and not necessarily a causative link. One of the thoughts was that milk intake is linked to greater intake in pesticides. And I know that's been a topic that's already discussed in a previous episode of this webinar series. So if you do drink milk, organic milk is the safest source, and otherwise plant-based sources are a good alternative. So what is the healthiest diet for our brains? There is not as much research out there as for cardiovascular diseases, but a very interesting study that is longitudinal I wanted to highlight comes out of Rush University in Chicago, and they have the Rush Memory and Aging Project. And in that study, around 1,000 patients between the ages of 58 and 98 were followed and basically asked to adhere to the so-called MIND diet. which is mainly plant-based, limiting meat. And what they found is that people who did adhere to the diet had a 53% reduction in the risk for Alzheimer's disease. So that is quite striking. And even moderate adherence to the diet. And we were just talking about that before the webinar starts. It's sometimes hard to be 100% kind of compliant with anything in life, but especially in our kind of society we live, it can be hard to completely avoid, processed food. But even people who only moderately adhere to the diet, they were still seeing a lot of benefits and 35% risk reduction. So sometimes people say, oh, I could never do that. I could never give up, a certain food. And I think the message is, well, you never need to be 100%. If there's, Thanksgiving, or if there's a Christmas holiday, or whatever it is in your culture and your life, it's always okay to have, a day of an exception. You don't need to be 100% to see the benefit. So participants who showed the highest adherence, though, had cognitive function comparative to a person who was 7.5 years younger. So that's quite striking. And, there currently is a lot of data among new medications out there for Alzheimer's disease, and we're not going to get into this, but, we can see quite a bit of difference from things that we all can do in our daily life and can start doing today. There's another study that came out last summer that really looked at a very, very large registry looking at people's diet habits. So these were 700,000 people follow-up years of 500 people, of which 500 people developed dementia, and they showed association with people consuming high processed food had a much higher rate of dementia. And again, showing that replacing just 10% of their food with unprocessed, minimally processed food had a 19% lower risk of dementia. So it's not too late. Making changes, whatever stage, whatever age someone is, can have positive effects down the line. And, what does ultra high processed mean? So we sometimes kind of use the concept of shopping around the aisles in the supermarket. So where we have the vegetables, the fruits, and so on. So kind of the concept of a one ingredient food is kind of considered a whole food. So the top 10 best foods for your brain would be things such as leafy greens, such as whole grains, seeds and beans, berries, nuts, also teas, herbs and spices, mushrooms, etc. And the bottom 10 would be things that are highly processed and have, sugar especially added. So pastries, processed foods, processed meats from the deli, red meat, and then also butter, fried food. A lot of cheeses are highly processed and so on. Excessive alcohol would also be on the list. So I was kind of mostly talking about Parkinson and Alzheimer's disease. Now I do know Synapticure started in the ALS world, so I did want to kind of touch on that as well. And, diet research and ALS is there's not a lot out there, but there's one very interesting study I found from JAMA Neurology, and this was published in 2016. And they looked at food journals from people with ALS. And they also found that people who had a high intake of fruit and vegetables, which was associated with high antioxidant intake, so again, a lot of fresh vegetables and fruit have antioxidants, had higher quality of life and higher function at baseline compared to people who had sort of a less healthful diet index. So I think, as we kind of said before, this isn't necessarily just applicable for one particular disorder or illness. It really is, a principle that's true for all of us. And so in my own life, well, how does this look like in practice? So I often have a green smoothie for breakfast, and it's a good way to get some spinach and possibly a carrot kind of in before just at the start of the day. And I add almond milk or coconut milk. I add some flaxseed. I add maybe half a banana, frozen banana. So lots of you can get really creative and add healthy sources of fat, healthy vegetables, fruit. You can kind of get a lot of servings in your day. And then for the rest of the day, and especially during the week for my work lunches, I do a lot of grain bowls, salads, fruit. So kind of pretty simple, but it's all filling and it's all good. And yeah, there's lots of resources out there that can help you with planning. So those are some examples, and I think the slides will be shared for those interested. So nutritionfacts.org is a wonderful website by Dr. Michael Greger, who is a kind of a pioneer in the lifestyle medicine world. Forks Over Knives, The Big Switch are all resources for people who are really wanting more help with recipe planning, grocery shopping planning, and they're actually free. So good resources to check out. Here's Dr. Greger. He also published a couple of books now. So one of his books is called How Not to Die, or How Not to Die Prematurely, and he has a checklist for every day. So lots of tools and resources available to kind of support people in their journey to change their diet, which is not always easy for sure. All right. I see there are some questions. Do you want to break now before we switch over to the next topic, or more do it towards the end?
Either way, whatever you prefer. A lot of the questions are about diet and supplements. If you want to maybe take a quick pause.
Yeah, we can definitely do that.
Okay. So there's a couple questions. A lot of them focus, we'll start off with the first one, is that, given that obviously we need to have healthy fats for, brain, mitochondria to function, is there any recommendation for specific sources of fats? So this particular question asks about marine fats versus plant sources like nuts, avocados. So any recommendations there?
Yeah, so I know that traditionally, or we often kind of do talk about the omega-3s and, fish sources, and lifestyle medicine initially kind of came from more of a cardiovascular health, and they were really trying to limit fat and kind of not kind of have the high fat food. And so the best sources would be considered, things like walnuts, things like seeds, avocado. So that's sort of the answer based on the lifestyle medicine. Now, certainly, as part of the Mediterranean diet, which is, has a lot of similarities, that does kind of, reinforce also fish, especially as a healthy fat source. But yeah, I think for, a lot of times I think we overestimate a little bit, or, we kind of think we need, for example, olive oil, that we need kind of large quantities of fat. So it's not as much as far as getting an adequate serving, is maybe not as much as we need, as we sometimes think we need. And as far as supplements, to just kind of answer that questions as well. So for most people, it's especially when you eat a mostly plant-based diet, it's advisable to take a vitamin B12 supplements. And so especially for Parkinson's, when you take medication like carbidopa levodopa, it's actually recommended now more and more to take vitamin B12 supplement to offset like homocysteine elevation, kind of almost regardless of your B12 level in the blood. So that's the main supplement I recommend to almost everyone is a B12 supplement, usually 1,000 to 500 to 1,000 microgram per day. Apart from that, for some people it can make sense to check some micronutrient deficiencies, especially if people lose weight quickly, or have trouble with swallowing or with digestion. But for most people, I don't typically recommend like a standard way of supplements. And then there is a lot to be said that actually the body can often absorb nutrients better if you get it through your diet rather than through a vitamin pill, so to speak.
Great. And there's a question specifically about, is there any, and this may not be specific for the neurological disorders, but any recommendations on ratios for the amount of omega-3 versus omega-6, or the ratios between those?
Yeah, I don't think I would kind of be able to give one recommendation that's applicable for everyone. But like I said, I generally we don't, as long as you eat a varied diet and kind of, this is kind of this daily dozen that's sort of recommended, and you're going to hit sort of these amounts, and get your fibers, get your antioxidants through your berries, through your nuts, through your seeds, you're kind of generally should be able to get most of these nutrients fulfilled.
And there's a question, I'm not sure if this is something that you've come across. We can certainly reach out to this person afterwards. Do you have any experience with particular types of tube feeds, formulas that are organic or that might more closely follow along with some of these recommendations?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So the answer is yes, there are companies who actually do have organic tube feeds. And yeah, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to endorse a specific company, but we can, yeah, I can maybe kind of offline kind of reach out or pass some things along. So, and there's certainly more than one company, but that's a good point, and I think it's true that a lot of times tube feeds are very high in sugar content and maybe not ideally long term. So we can do better. And then, if someone is tube fed, you can also, make food yourself, or that's best if you do it with the guidance of a nutritionist, so you can kind of make sure you're hitting all the macro, all the goals, but that's also another way to kind of puree like real food yourself. But there are some companies that do more natural tube feeds.
Okay. And then for those people who actually need help either maintaining or gaining weight, and so obviously need to add on, more protein, more healthy fats, are there specific recommendations for those that really need to sort of, increase that amount, that balance on their plates, so to speak?
Yeah, I think, sometimes if someone really is struggling and losing a lot of weight, and maybe sometimes are really trying to be as liberal as possible and just kind of say like, well, focus on things that do have a relatively calorie dense or high caloric, but also are enjoyable or pleasurable, right? And for certain people, that can be milkshakes, right? You can kind of make a banana shake and add some peanut butter or almond butter, or nuts in general, and that's an easy way to make your own kind of high calorie milkshake, again in a more natural way than some of the store-bought products. But yeah, I think for specific goals, it's never a bad idea to actually consult a nutritionist to have a bit of a better idea what your daily calorie intake should be, for example. So I think that's a little bit hard to answer, so that it applies for everyone.
Absolutely. And then the last question for now is any foods that help maximize dopamine production or, natural sources of dopamine?
Yeah, so I think most people are aware that there's certain beans, fava beans, that have dopamine content. We it's a bit of a double-edged sword, because these things are not controlled and not sort of measured, so it can be a little bit hard to know exactly how much you're sort of getting if you're eating those types of beans. And so generally, if people are actually on prescription medication for Parkinson, we're often not recommending to kind of mix, because the content of dopamine is going to be, or the quantity is going to kind of vary a lot from day to day. But yeah, I think in general, again, maximize it. So there is actually a study that looks kind of in an ongoing manner on supplements that people take, or what is kind of a healthy diet for Parkinson's specifically, and that's by Lori Mishler in Portland. It's called Modifiable Variables in Parkinson's, and I'm going to be happy to share the link. And yeah, so and what they've seen in that study is really people who eat a large amount of vegetables and generally have, report a better quality of life. So again, I think it's really often more the overall health, and not necessarily focusing on one very specific nutrient or ingredient in the diet. Yeah.
Right. And I have a lot of patients that ask about things like Mucuna pruriens, which can boost levodopa to some degree, but as you mentioned, there's no regulation on it. So what you may get from one batch to the next can be quite variable, and there's no regulation. So it's very hard for us to make any assumptions based on, if symptoms vary from day to day, whether that's related to the underlying disease itself or whether you're just getting varying amounts of levodopa.
Right. And then it's also sometimes there's nausea associated with it. And so then that needs to be kind of navigated. So yeah, I mean, I generally I'm very much in favor of using carbidopa levodopa, just because it is as natural of a prescription medication as you can get. And we just have a lot of experience with it. And the carbidopa part in it really helps with offsetting the nausea. So
Absolutely. And
yeah.
there's one more question. I'll quickly answer. So somebody says organic food is expensive. If people can't buy everything organic, what foods are most important to get organic and to avoid the pesticides? So I don't know if you have any comments. I can certainly post a link. There's a link that comes out from every year that sort of talks about the Dirty Dozen, sort of unrelated to this, the Daily Dozen, but those that tend to have the most pesticides, mostly because they're the hardest to watch. So things like raspberries, strawberries, there's a few others. So I can certainly post the link, but I don't know if you have any thoughts about that as well.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think certain berries and I think, yeah, certain vegetables are always on that list. Celery, I think. So some, yeah, so and yeah, with that being said, not everything needs to be organic to get, health benefits, but that Dirty Dozen is a good start. And sometimes people, to kind of save money, will kind of start growing their own vegetables, and you can kind of even, there's more, not everyone has a huge garden to do that, but there's kind of more space saving ways to kind of do that. You can kind of grow vegetables inside. There's kind of more creative ways more recently that people kind of explore that kind of thing. And of course, some places have community gardens, so there's some creative ways of kind of enforcing that kind of money saving way to actually grow your own vegetables and fruit.
Great. Okay.
Yeah, well, let's move on and talk a bit about exercise. And we all know that exercise has many benefits for our body, for our mind, which is, I think, sometimes overlooked, right? So we know that we should exercise for our heart health, but exercise is also good for our immune system and for our brain health and for our mental health. So it's one of the best ways to actually help with depression and anxiety. And so I just kind of picked out one study here, which I thought was really interesting in people with mild cognitive impairment. So this was published last summer. It was a study that enrolled close to 300 sedentary men and women with mild cognitive impairment. So some memory problems, not dementia. But the question, of course, is with mild cognitive impairment, how can we stop it from becoming dementia? And so in this group, people were assigned to either an aerobic exercise arm with moderate intensity or balance and stretching exercises with low intensity. And this was done for 4 times a week for 30 to 40 minutes. And the findings were, interestingly, that at the end of the year, both groups maintained their cognitive function and did not worsen their memory function. And I really love this study because a lot of times, talking about exercise, people will say, gosh, I have really bad knees and I can't, go on a treadmill, or I can't, have really bad balance. But anything is better than nothing. So even doing really low impact things, just working on balance, stretching, really makes a difference. So this is a nice data, and this is an ongoing study, and there's hopefully more to come. So in general, I'm sorry, was there a question or?
No, I just posted something about one of the links.
Got it. Yeah, so people will kind of ask, well, what exercise should I do? How much, right? And kind of there are many studies actually looking at comparing different types of exercise in Parkinson's, but to kind of just go back to, well, what is generally advised for as far as physical guidelines for adults. And in general, we should all be doing at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity exercise per week, or 75 minutes of vigorous physical activity per week. And there is actually concept that doing even just a couple minutes of really vigorous activity every day can make a difference. So again, nothing is too little. So with Parkinson specifically, there's actually the Parkinson Foundation has kind of released some exercise guidelines, and in general, it's best to mix it up. So to do some amount of exercise that is aerobic, but also include some strength training and include some stretching, include some balance training. So really kind of a mixture is advised. And then things that train your coordination. So whether this is the kind of a famous boxing, the Rocksteady boxing, whether this is dancing, whether it's bicycling, but things that train coordination or rhythmic seem to have like some specific benefit. So with that being said, there's many in the Parkinson's community who already do exercise on a regular basis and enjoy it. But I also have many patients who, struggle a bit with finding or getting started. And, just some tips on how you can get started is really nothing is too small. Even starting with 10 minutes per day can really lead to building up to longer exercise over time. Finding exercise that you enjoy, doing it with others, right? So there's a reason why some of these group exercise classes are very popular. And then, of course, you have the benefit of adding that social aspect that is also so good for us. So even 7 minutes, even a few minutes per day can be helpful. So this is the 7-minute workout became popular several years ago. So you can kind of look that up and find out what exactly that entails. And then trying to set yourself a specific goal can be very helpful, right? Because we all kind of know how this goes with New Year's resolutions when we say like, oh, tomorrow I will be healthy. But we don't define really, well, what does that mean? So trying to make these goals as specific as we can so we can really hold ourselves accountable and measure if we actually achieve the goal can be very helpful. So an example, what a SMART goal really means. So saying something like, I will lose 10 pounds or I will eat less processed food, it's not really specific. On the other hand, if you say, this week, I will exercise 3 times for 20 minutes each, and best even writing it down exactly what you're planning to do, you're going to have a much higher chance of actually doing it, especially if you do it with someone else, right? If you're meeting with a friend, you're going to have a much lower chance of actually letting that friend down than you would if you just leave it very vague and might kind of forget about it. Yeah, so we're going to just briefly touch on a few other things. And sleep. Most of us know that sleep is very much tied to our health as well as to our brain health. And sleep has many, many important functions. It cools the brain and the body. It regulates our many functions in the brain. It's actually really important for memory. It's important for growth. It reduces inflammation in the body. And it's also really important for mood and emotional regulation. So with all these things being said, we know that in Parkinson's, there can be many sleep dysregulation or sleep disorders that can affect the dream sleep or REM sleep. So as we cycle through these stages of sleep from lighter to deeper sleep and then to dream sleep, that can be affected in Parkinson. And there are specific treatment avenues specifically for people who have that REM sleep or dream sleep disorder. Melatonin can be a very helpful medication for many people to regulate sleep better. But it's also really important to have a look at our sleep habits, being as regular as we can with our sleep schedule. Working on our bedtime routines. So many people, they'll tell me they have trouble shutting their brain off, right? I don't know, Jamie, if you can relate to that. So yeah, so sometimes we have busy days, we have stress in our days. It can just be hard to actually, get into that relaxed state. And so finding a certain bedtime ritual or routine, and whether that's reading a book or doing a brief meditation, taking a bath, so kind of working on that transition time can often be very helpful. Avoiding caffeine or smoking, especially late in the day, and having a good sleep environment, especially now it's so hot outside. So making sure your sleep environment is ideally not too hot, and spending some time and then planning that, and avoiding too much napping during the day. So lots of kind of ways to optimize our sleep. And then, like I said, for people with specific sleep disorders related to Parkinson's, it can often be helpful to see a sleep specialist, get screened for things like sleep apnea, which can be very common. So those can be more specific things but won't apply to everyone. But these sleep habits and working on that is definitely something we all can use. So to end things up, I just want to talk a bit more of the social connectedness I mentioned in the beginning. And we all know that being with friends and family often makes us feel good and, helps us enjoy life more. But what most of us do not realize is that the flip side, being socially isolated, is really bad for our health. And in this study here, social isolation was found to be a predictor of higher mortality compared to smoking. So very traditionally thought to be, smoking, we all kind of know is bad for our health, bad for our heart health, but we often don't realize that things yeah, sure, we feel alone, we might feel more depressed, but it's actually a truly risk factor for impaired mortality. And this was specifically true for men, but also found to be, yeah, like I said, for smoking and high blood pressure, kind of very comparable effects. So what is the opposite of connection? Disconnection, separation, isolation. And this was especially true for all of us during the COVID pandemic. So here's Dr. Subramanian and Dr. Mishley that I mentioned earlier for the variables in Parkinson's disease study. And they actually looked at how the COVID pandemic affected quality of life in Parkinson's disease. And they did find, unfortunately, that the more people did feel socially isolated, the lower they rated their quality of life. So now that the pandemic is, COVID is not over, right? COVID is still around, but fortunately, many restrictions during the pandemic have been much different now, and we're able in most parts of the countries to do real life meetings, gatherings, do exercise together. This is, support groups have kind of started again, and whether that is in person or also virtual, these are just all good opportunities to sort of offset these negative effects of social isolation. And just some other ideas, what we all can do to stay socially connected. So of course, many of us have our circles of family and friends, but, especially in other circumstances, you might not have a close circle of family and friends. And so finding other opportunities to be active, and whether that involves volunteering, engaging online with groups of people like we're doing today, being active in a religious or spiritual group, being active with other activities such as animal shelters, other hobbies, sports event, whatever it is. It can sometimes be hard to make that first step, but it's usually worth it. So I think we're close to the end of the hour, so I'm just going to sort of wrap it up. So we talked mostly about the diet and exercise aspect. We talked a little bit about the sleep and maintaining social relationships. We didn't talk about the avoidance of risky substances, but I know this was covered by Dr. Dorsey in a previous event. And as far as Parkinson's goes, there's more data now on pollution, on pesticides being risk factors for Parkinson's. So things we often don't have direct control over in our day-to-day life, but things we can help on the advocacy side and policy side to get certain substances such as certain pesticides banned. And then there's very important efforts underway in that regard. And managing stress, all these other things we talked about, especially exercise, social connectedness, sleep, can all be helpful to achieve that goal. So with that being said, I hope you did find the information helpful and get, we all, like we kind of talked before, it can be really hard to make those first steps, and it feels sometimes overwhelming to make changes in our lifestyles. But starting somewhere is always better than not doing anything, and even small changes can really add up over time. So thank you so much for listening, and I'm happy to answer some additional questions if there are any.
Fantastic, thank you. So I will just comment on an anonymous comment that came in. A lot of the comments or a lot of the suggestions that we make today, the goal is to really make suggestions for people across the spectrum of disease, and not just ALS, but also Parkinson's disease and some of the other disorders that we treat as well. So we 100% understand that some of the suggestions may not be accurate or adequate for one disease group or stage versus another. So, we understand that. We just wanted to make sure that we're really trying to address people across different diseases and across all stages. So please keep that in mind. So one of the questions was about exercise and, what is the best type of exercise? Anaerobic, aerobic, there's some concerns about cortisol. Obviously, it has some benefits, but there's also some concerns that it could be harmful as well. So any advice on specific types of exercise? Obviously, that will vary, differently between Parkinson's disease versus ALS, where we don't want to encourage a significant amount of exercise because it may cause things to progress a little bit more quickly.
Right. So as you said, it's a little bit hard, especially since there are different, to address people and with different neurologic disorders and different stages, different abilities to kind of give a general advice that will apply to everyone. As I said before, for Parkinson's, we generally try to really mix the types of exercise. So I have I have some patients who really like weightlifting, but so we kind of encourage them to do more aerobic exercise. Yet generally, as far as the cortisol is concerned, I think it's just kind of a good idea to keep more strenuous exercise, aerobic exercise sort of earlier in the day and kind of not do it in the, 4 or 6 hours before bedtime to not be too activating. So that would be kind of my main advice as far as that goes, but generally sort of mixing things up. And if someone has specific limitations, or especially with more advanced Parkinson's or ALS, I think starting out with seeing a physical therapist and really, or a personal trainer, and getting a program that's really tailored towards your capabilities, your goals, and I think is always a good idea. So a lot of the general advice applies mostly to people in, relatively early stages in a neurologic disease. I think, again, as people have more limitations, starting out with a physical therapist or individualized personal trainer is always a good idea.
Yep. And I always recommend, a couple of things. Number one, find something you enjoy, right? If you don't enjoy doing something, it's going to be really hard to stick to it. So find something that it is that, that you really enjoy, that you feel like you can continue to do, and use your body as a guide, right? If you exercise, then it takes you, 6 days to recover from it, then it's probably too much, either for where you are or maybe for what stage you're in your disease. But I always recommend too, especially for women, we know that muscle mass can help improve bone density and bone health. So it's not that you have to go out and, do weightlifting all the time, but having some weight bearing exercises, where you can build muscle, not necessarily weight bearing, but at least, exercises where you can help build muscle can help contribute to bone health and bone density, so that if you do have falls, that your bones are more protected, that you're at less risk of osteopenia and osteoporosis as well.
Absolutely. And there's also bone health and bone weight bearing doesn't always mean heavy weights. There's really kind of 1 or 2 pound weights can make a huge difference. And there's yoga for osteoporosis, so just body weight exercises can make a huge difference. So I think there's definitely safe exercises that can be applied for every body, and then again, sometimes getting individual guidance is a good idea, so you do things that are safe for you.
Absolutely. So I don't think we have any more questions. I'm just looking through the list to see if there's any more. If anyone does have questions, feel free to continue to make comments, and we'll try to answer those after the talk today. I'm doing one last check to see if there's anything else that's come through. I don't see anything. So with that, we'll end there. Dr. Lefebvre, thank you so much for joining us today. This was fantastic. Lots and lots of great information. These are a lot of the questions that I get from patients every day. So I feel like this is really helpful for me as an individual and for my family, but also to be able to give more information to patients as well. Thank you, everyone who joined us today. This will be available for listening and watching later. And we hope to see you next time. We've got another one coming up on August 11th that's doing motion analysis. So we call 3D motion analysis for Parkinson's disease and tremor. Thanks so much. Appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you for having me. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye.